So welcome back to the Walkout Podcast.
where we talk about fights, news, and more.
About a month ago, the UFC released its very controversial new meta ranking system for the overall rankings in each weight division of the UFC, and of course, also the pound for pound rankings. And to say the least, these have stirred up a bit of a ruckus in the UFC fanbase. So we thought that it was only right for us to provide our own pound for pound ranking in the UFC. We're only going to do a top 10 today because, to be honest, who cares about those last 10 to 15 spots? I mean, they're not too important. The top 10 is what matters, and that's what we're going through. So, if you haven't seen it, we did a similar video, just a more outdated version by now, about 8 months ago, and we're going to be judging on exactly the same premises. So, everything from activity to record to style, about everything. And the concept, if you don't know it quickly, of pound for pound is if you put every single fighter from flyweight to heavyweight at the same weight, who would come out on top? Of course, hard to say, but it's opinion, right? So, to kick it off, who do we have on the number one spot of our pound for pound list?
Coming in at number one in our pound for pound list is, of course, the undisputed Islam Makhachev, the welterweight champion, the two-time division champ, and pretty, newly crowned in last November. And, he has a basically near perfect record. His only loss in the UFC came in his absolute first fight when he got knocked out early, but after that, it's only been success after success, and he's knocked out. So he's knocked out. He has knocked out legends such as Alexander Volkanovski, but he's also submitted others like Charles Oliveira. So this guy has a, it's broad range of just excellence, technical excellence. But let's not go too far into that. We're here to motivate why he's here instead of other fighters. And if we're talking about somebody else here, as I touched upon, Alexander Volkanovski, he would be maybe the other fighter you could put here in this number one spot. But since I would say that Islam has a even better record as him as of right now, since he beat him twice, even though the first fight was really close and almost a bit controversial. The second fight was pretty clearly, even though it was also on a pretty short notice, right? And it was Volk stepping up. So there's a bit of context to that fight as well, but still, based on the tape we have from Islam versus Volk, is that Islam did come out on top in that matchup. And since then, it's been further wins versus Dustin Poirier, Renato Moicano, but a very good win against JDM, even though he basically laid on top of him. It was still a domination to win the welterweight belt, and that's, at least for me, why Islam is the number one here. He's the only one in the UFC right now that I would say is just dominance, right?
Yeah, I think that's fair, to be honest. And like you said, to be a double champ and been reigning over the UFC as the pound for pound king as long as he has, it's incredibly impressive. And as we all know, he's probably the greatest lightweight of all time.
Yeah.
He, according to the stats, at least, and most of us would agree with that. And then to go up to welterweights, say what you want about Yetel Medellina, but he is a tough guy, and Islam completely dominated him, like you mentioned. So, yeah, I agree with you. We don't need to go into the technical stuff because, as we know, Islam Makhachev is basically almost perfect in most aspects of MMA. So what he might need for his resume is like a super fight. Even though I thought the Volk fight was like that, of course we all want to see the Makhachev versus Topuria fight somewhere down the line. But it's going to be interesting to watch his title defense against Ian Gary coming up. Um, and maybe that will solidify his position as the number one pound for pound guy even more. But I agree with you. There was like no one else that you can put above him. Because if we're going on to the second spot, we have, of course, the great Alexander Volkanovski, like you mentioned. For me, one of the greatest fighters in UFC history, and certainly the best featherweight in UFC history. But the comeback he has had, because this is not only nostalgia, because of course Volk isn't in his prime anymore, but the comeback after the knockout loss against Ilya Topuria, which afterwards it's not that big of a shame because Ilya knocks out almost anyone he faces. But to have double wins over Diego Lopez, who is one of the best contenders in the featherweight division, is incredibly impressive. I mean, what you could say is that he hasn't been able to reach that double champ status like Islam Makhachev, but that's only because he had to go up to lightweight and face Islam. If he had gone up when someone like, if there was, if you can call it a weaker champ, maybe like a Charles Oliveira, maybe he
Yeah.
would have had a chance. But for me, Volk is locked into the number two spot here. I would guess that you agree, right?
Yeah, I agree, and I think that especially on the point of the Islam Makhachev, the fights that Volk had to fight against him, the first one was pretty close, right? Also, you can
Yeah, really
almost have
competitive.
an
Yeah.
very competitive. You can almost have an argument for Volk. I'd say at that moment, both of them were basically, you know, um, matched against each other. There was nothing to separate them. You'd make that fight 10 times, and I think you have Volk come out of top 5 out of 10 times, probably, or at least 4 out of 10 times. It's super close between those. So for me, the only reason why Volk is below Islam is really because, yeah, you have those two fights back to back, and they happened. If it could have very well been, Volk sitting here today with that first win instead, and we'd have a completely different conversation. But then there's also the knockout against when he got knocked out against Ilya Topuria. You talked about the comeback versus Lopez, which is just incredible. Really rate Diego Lopez as well, and yeah, I think it should be clear that Islam is the number one right now, and Volk is the clear number two for me at least. And
Yeah.
it's gonna be pretty difficult for Volk to climb, right? He probably won't fall far, but could he take Islam's pound for pound number one? Would that be maybe if Islam lost? Would he take the spot?
That's Yeah, that's a good point. If Islam loses, I don't think that they will put Ian Gary as the number one,
Yeah,
and I don't think we will either. So by process of elimination, it would have to be
yeah,
Volk. So that could be like really easy. And even if someone else climbs up, as we expect them to, um, there is talk of a Volkanovski versus Justin Gaethje fight. Who I would personally favor Volk, and I know I'm a fanboy of Volk, but I think that's a really nice matchup for him against Justin Gaethje.
yeah.
And if he managed to become a double champ, I mean that's the last thing his legacy needs, I reckon. So it's gonna be interesting to keep an eye out. And good points, like you said in our later video when we do this again and update the pound for pound rankings. Maybe Volk will be the king, but only time will tell. Um, Moving on then to the number three spot, and I believe those two are, I think most people would agree with Islam as number one and Volk as number two. But this one might spark some debate. Who do we have at number three?
Yeah, now it's as you said, the first two are not very controversial picks. This one is a little bit controversial, so strap in. We have Mr. Tom Aspinall here as our third pick for the pound for pound list of the UFC. And the heavyweight champ, I'm still gonna refer to him as the heavyweight champ because it was a no contest fight against Cyril Gahn. He is still the champ. He hasn't lost. If you look at his record, he hasn't lost. So he has lost a long time ago, but I mean, he hasn't lost versus Cyril Gahn at least. His record for the last 3 years or so is very good. It's completely untainted, and he has fought basically everyone at the heavyweight division and beat them up, knocked them out even in the last couple of years. And for me, if we're talking about also someone with technical excellence who can do basically everything at that type of division heavyweight, we have Thomas Aspinall. He can grapple, he can strike, he can do he does well in basically every area of combat there is in MMA.
Yeah.
So for me, it's a clear number three spot for Thomas Aspinall here, and I don't want to see or hear anyone talk about Cyril Gahn here because that was just it was an eye poke. It was a clear eye poke, and he should have been disqualified. against Tom Aspinall. I'm guessing that you share my opinion here, but still, I
Of
want to
course.
hear your take on this as well.
Yeah, of course. Just to continue where you left off there, uh,
Yeah,
everyone who knows MMA on a deep level knows that Cyril Gane is known for cheating in a lot of ways, but eye pokes especially, and that he did two in that fight, and the one that injured Tom was incredibly brutal and a rule break that should result in a loss of a fight, absolutely. So, and if Cyril Gane was confident that he could beat Tom Aspinall, he wouldn't have had to cheat, would he? So that's all I have to say about that. But like you said, it's worth saying if you have forgotten. Uh, Curtis Blades, round one. Pavlovich, round one. Tybora, round one. Volkov,
it's
round one.
incredible.
Spivak, round one. I mean, these are top names that other heavyweights would struggle with, other elite heavyweights would struggle with. And also a very great point. If you watch some of Thomas Pinal's regional MMA and his training and sparring, he's world class at jiu-jitsu and grappling. His conditioning is brilliant, but you've never seen it because no one has been good enough to drag that out of him. And people
Yeah,
say stuff like, "Yeah, I want to take him to deep waters." No one has been able to. So sure, maybe John Jones could have, but what did John Jones, the so-called goat of MMA, do? He ran away from Tom Aspinall for more than a year because he was scared of fighting him. And then the UFC, they called his bluff, so to speak. They put the money on the table, and what did he do? He retired and then unretired directly after. So that says everything you need to know. Tom Aspinall, his skill set, like you said, is so elite, and I think he's even though he's the heavyweight champ, which is like the baddest man on the planet, he's still incredibly underrated. I think so. I totally agree with you. I think he,
especially now, he's lost a lot of, even before I thought it was underrated, but especially now after the Cyril Gane fight and the whole, injury
people calling him a
crisis.
quitter and stuff like that. Yeah,
Yeah, it's super bad for. I mean, I wouldn't say it's super bad for him. He isn't losing any real fans or something, but still, it's not. It's just so stupid of people to underrate this guy just because he has an eye injury. Because the other fighters who are gone, the cheater, eye
yeah.
poked him. And somehow Tom is the one who's at fault in this horrible situation. So I just want to see Tom get back in there against hopefully Cyril Gane and just beat him up, you
Yeah.
know, handily, and we can. And this pick won't be controversial anymore. People will understand because it's a clean record for Tomas Pinal in the UFC. If we want to talk about undisputed, want to talk about dominance, like with Alexander Volkanovski and Islam Makhachev, you have it in Tomas Pinal, and it will become clear when he comes back to the octagon. That's what I have to say about Tomas Pinal, at least.
100%. I couldn't add anything more except for our number fourth
Yeah,
spot, following on from Thomas Penal, where we have our first non-champion of the list, which is of course Ilya Topuria. And I would like to have like a similar rant here. Might be a lot of ranting in this video, but bear with us. But I mean, I already had this rant after the UFC White House card because just quickly, if you haven't seen it, it's so incredible to me. It's incredibly baffling the amount of disrespect shown to Ilya Topuria, a fighter who is already at the age of, is he 29, I think, one of the greatest UFC fighters of all time. He's knocked out Charles Oliveira, Max Holloway, and Alexander Volkanovski. People say that they're finished, but all of them have come back and had good wins after that. So they're not, are they? And
yeah,
just because he has one off night, people think is all of a sudden really bad. I mean, it just doesn't make sense at all. And if you look at the odds from the bookies, if like potential odds for a rematch against Justin Gaethje, Ilya is still a favorite. Not as big of a favorite, but still a significant favorite because they know his skill set is far superior than Justin Gaethje's, and his recent resume is far superior. I'm sorry, it just is. So for that reason, Ilya slots in at number four because I believe if they all were on the same weight class, he would beat potentially even Islam Volk. Volk is already beaten and Tom, but definitely everyone will mention after this. But I mean, you could argue for the Justin Gaethje win, but surely you agree with me that, or loss, should I say, against Gaethje? Of course, it was a loss. One loss doesn't make you're a bad champion, right? Or a bad fighter.
100%, and I think we've seen enough. As you covered, the wins against Volk, the wins against, it's just Charles Oliveira, and also versus Max Holloway. It's an incredible streak, and you should not forget that anytime soon. 100%.
Yeah, that's really true. I mean, like we said, this is only speaking about the rankings in according to the other fighters. We don't need to delve into Ilya's fight style because I think most people would agree with us. He's almost perfect in his game. So what I'm excited for is for him to, to come back and just, show the world who he is. And he's one of the most exciting fighters in the entire UFC. So do you want to add anything to that, or should we move on?
No, I think you covered it perfectly. Ilya Topuria will come back, and when he does, it will be similar, to Thomas Bernal. I think he will show levels in that division again.
100%. All right. Do you want to take the number 5 spot? Who also, should I add, is a non-champion, right?
So coming in at number 5 is Merab, and similarly, almost, to Ilya, and no, similarly to Ilya, almost, we cannot forget what this guy has done before he lost versus Petr Yan. Everything before that, it's an insanely good record. I would wager an even better record basically than Ilya's almost, because it's even, it might not be better in quality, but it's close to it, and it's such a long record as well. There's so many wins that are stacked up here, some early losses, maybe not as invincible as Ilya's, but there's a lot of work done here in the bantamweight division, and you could almost surely say that he was the bantamweight GOAT before the Petr Yan fight. Just, fighting when he fought back to back to back. I think it was almost 4 times within a year before he fought Petr Yan. No wonder that he came into that fight and didn't really look himself. So for me, that fight does the loss versus Petr Yan does have some important context to it in terms of his performance, probably. And it's sort of similar to Ilya, I think one bad night, as you said, doesn't, make the fighter, doesn't lower his level or anything. I think we'd see him come back and he will be much stronger again, or at least probably will be able to compete with Petr Yan. I would still say, though, that there's some maybe context here in regards to his age. He is a lot older, and he did put a lot more strain on himself by taking fights back to back to back already. So it might be a case of, him coming back and not maybe looking in his physical prime anymore. That could very well happen. So, but right now, I'm still backing Merab just for the insane volume he has put out before. The gas tank, we cannot forget about it. The best gas tank in the UFC that I've ever seen. Merab is really at number 5.
100%. I don't have a lot more to add, apart from the fact that if you want to know our thoughts here, it's just the fact that when you fight 3 title defenses in a year and then have a fourth one, I almost feel like he's allowed to lose, and it shouldn't impact that much because to do that is uncharted territory. No one's ever done it because it's incredibly straining, like you said, at his age as well. 35, it's not too young for a bantamweight. So for me, he had a bad night. Everyone does. That was his first loss in the UFC in like 6 or 7 years, I think, which is amazing when he's fought people like Sandeg and O'Malley, Umar,
Yeah, he was
Cejudo.
almost asking for it, right? But he
Yeah,
fought
yeah. And I
so
mean,
often, so much, and he was almost, he almost brought it upon himself
yeah, I
into.
mean, it was like a tough task when he fought Corey on the third title defense. I thought that was impressive. So just because he lost
Yeah.
the fourth, he still had 3 consecutive title defenses in a year against 3 very different styles. So I mean, that's amazing. And I back him, like you said, to come back even stronger. And it's nice to see that he's taken some time off, even though does Real American Freestyle now. He's still recovering and working on his game. So I'm excited to see him come back in the rematch against PTN, hopefully. And there's no doubt in my mind that Merab is still one of absolutely the top guys in the UFC, and that he deserves this number 5th ranked spot in our pound for pound ranking here.
100%. And talking about another guy who might be, a bit controversially below Merab here, which listeners will have noticed at this point, is a certain someone. Do you want to introduce him?
Yeah, it is the guy that we just mentioned, Patreon, and I know a lot of people have been putting him. You see on Twitter and stuff or X, should I say, when people do their own rankings and stuff, and a lot of people put him right at the top, and I get it, right? It's an incredible achievement to beat Merab, but a bit of a reality check, and I don't want to seem like a hater, but like decision against Marcus McKee, decision against a washed up Figgy, decision against Song Yadong is alright. And then before that, it was loss against Merab, like we mentioned, loss against Sean O'Malley, whose career hasn't been as good as a lot of us would have thought. Two losses against Aljo. I mean, of course, he's a UFC legend, I suppose. At least a bantamweight legend, I would say, Peter Yan. But he's not like he's far away from the GOAT conversation where Merab is. And I think one win against a very exhausted Merab isn't enough for me to put him like top three or anywhere in that territory. But of course, he deserves this spot because his record isn't all that, but technically he's very good. He put on a perfect game plan and executed it to
Yeah.
perfection to beat Merab. And just that performance on its own is incredibly impressive, right?
Yeah, 100%. That performance, against a Merab that was in the form of his life, but also possibly, completely overstepping his own boundaries of his body, in fighting that often. So there's a bit of context there, but still, yeah, it was a perfect game plan and a perfect performance from Peter Yan in that fight against someone who was probably tied for the second place in the pound for pound in Merab, and
Yeah.
who really looked unbeatable, Merab. So we have to remember that. But still, uh, I think Peter Yan, it's a very deserved spot here, but Merab still deserves to be just that one spot higher. If Merab comes back and he loses, then of course immediately Peter Yan goes above. We cannot have the champion below if there's another fighter who also loses back to back. But
That's a key point
otherwise,
there.
yeah,
I mean, Pigeon, this is, what do you say, make or break, right? Now he
of
has
course,
the defense, and we assume it's going to be against Marab. It should be. We haven't. I don't know why hasn't been announced really, but I suppose Marab wanted a lot of time off. Maybe Jon wanted as well. I know he has small kids and all that, but hopefully we get that fight in a few months, and that would say a lot because if Peter Jon defeats Amerov again, who's come back with learning from his mistakes and has rebuilt himself, and Jan still wins, then he's like maybe top three even, depending on the landscape of the UFC. But I think just going off this recent win, I think this is where it deserves to be. Um, all right, should we move on then to the number 7 spot? Another non-champion. Like we said, that's a bit of the theme here because we move through these rankings and it sounds almost, what do you say, like it's not totally correct. I think some people would just put all of the champions as like the top 8, but that's not really how it is because if you really know MMA, you know that it's not especially
the
like the.
champ isn't always the best fighter. That's just how it is.
That's what I'm trying to get
Yeah.
to here. It sounds almost stupid when you say it like that, but that's exactly what I was trying to say. And speaking of that, who comes in on the number 7th spot here?
It's of course Alex Pereira, the two-time division champ, who tried to reach, for the stars, tried to be, what do you say, become. He's already a legend, so there's not really much more he could become. Try to become, I don't know, invincible by
I
becoming
mean,
also. Yeah,
he could become the GOAT. I mean, some people thought that he would be the first one to be a three-time division champ, and a lot of people would think that he was the GOAT if he did that. So that's like the most legendary achievement ever, right, in the UFC.
yeah. If he had won that fight versus Sirgan, he would probably be the number one in this list, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah. But he didn't.
So exactly, but he didn't. So he's here at number 7. But still, yeah, now when we're saying it, it almost feels like he's a bit too low on the list. But still, there is. If we look at his, his last year or 2 years, you have a loss versus Erdogan, the most recent, obviously. Before that, the comeback win versus Ankalev, a very impressive win, which was after, of course, the first time around when he lost the belt versus Ankalev. And before that, an impressive win versus Khalil Roundtree, and then a win versus Yiri, and before that, a win versus Jamal Hill. That's in the last 2 years. If we look at his record, it's 2 very good wins, and I think 2 losses. Who really, if you think about the Ankalev fight, he did come back in the rematch and easily knocked him out. So we can almost write off that first loss if you think about it really in terms of the GOAT, the pound for pound list right now. So it's only that Sirgan loss for me that's really worth to mention here in terms of putting him down. And he reached for the stars. He couldn't really make it. He tried to be the GOAT, tried to be. He's still a legend. He's still on that list of the GOATs, I think, in the UFC all time. If you stretch it maybe to top 10, right, or something, he should be after 100%. But right now, it's the current UFC pound for pound list. And if there's anything we can also see about Alex Pereira, it's maybe the fact that if you put him in there against someone like, Tom Aspinall, same size, Volk, same size, Islam, same size, there's a big, there's a big, what can you say, a big deficiency in his game, and that is the grappling that we've already seen before. So that has to put him down a little bit on the list. And then also, of course, that he lost recently versus Surgan, but still, he's done just enough. His record is so incredible that he's done enough to remain here. He's not going below this spot, not right now.
Exactly that. I mean, you would want to put him higher just because he's a go to the sport, but you have to look at the record. And I mean, the Cyril loss is controversial, as we all know. Whether or not you agree with the back of the headshots being back of the headshots or not. I mean, I've seen great fighters like Volk coming out and saying that they were illegal, but
Yeah.
other fighters like Bisping saying that they were legal. So it splits opinion, but if you would say that that fight was like not a fluke because Cyril Gane did win, but he did cheat, in my opinion, which makes that loss kind of alright for Pereira. And otherwise, he's avenged his losses. So I mean, the guy is a legend. His resume is great. He's there to be great, and even though he lost last time out, he totally agrees. He deserves, this spot, of course. And it's going to be interesting to see what's next for him because if he goes on, I think he's staying in heavyweight, right? And if he goes on and beats a few top ranked heavyweights, like maybe like a Volkov, Pavlovich, Josh Hokit,
Yeah.
then he's almost solidifying himself as a top heavyweight as well. And that would still be incredible gold status, I think, at least. So he's like Pition, his spot here very much depends on his next fight, I reckon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And now we've covered Alex Pereira at number 7. Who do we have at number 8 then?
Yeah, we have one of my favorite fighters actually, and I know I shouldn't let that taint this, and I would personally like to, put him a bit higher maybe, but then again you have to be reasonable. It's Alexander Pantoja, and a lot of people have been forgetting about this guy, and it really annoys me because for me, he's one of the most talented, one of the most well-rounded fighters in the entire UFC, maybe even in the entire UFC's history. However, the thing here, the elephant in the room, is his record because he's beaten everyone who's been put in front of him. Basically, in the recent fights, he has some losses. The Joshua Van fight, for me, it's a no contest. He has lost like 6 years ago, but after that, he beat Cap, although it was a younger version of Cap. And then when he won the belt, he had 4 consecutive title defenses against top guys in the division. But here's the thing: if you compare him to someone like Alex Pereira, who is just above him. Brandon Royval, Brandon Moreno, Urseg Asakura, and Kaikra France. Are they like the flyweight equivalent of, Ankalaev, Roundtree, Yiri, Jamal Hill, Blahovic? For me, they're
No,
just
no,
not.
no, no,
So the
no.
strength of schedule is really what lets Pantoja down. Because for me, he would have a good shot. He would have a solid shot of beating any fighter in the UFC if they were the same weight class. However, we're not in make believe land. I can't just put him at number one for that. You have to be a bit checked by the record here, but all in all, he's an amazing fighter, right?
100%. And it's almost as you said, you can only beat what's in front of you with Pantoja, and he has an incredible volume on his record. He has dominated the flyweight division up until the injury, of course, versus Joshua Van. And I mean, you can't really, as you covered, you can't really let that fight paint his record, because it's a near perfect record before that, or I think it might be a perfect record in the UFC. He might have lost early. I'm not entirely sure, but it's just the quality maybe that's lacking, the top quality. If he'd have beat Joshua Van, in that fight, if he hadn't gotten the injury and the fight would have gone on and he'd have beat him, we'd be sitting in a completely different conversation around him right now, because he'd have probably his best win on his record would be Joshua Van that far so far. So we'll see when he comes back. It would be really interesting, right, to see that fight play out.
Please book that fight. I need that because
Absolutely.
Joshua Van is like, he's also one of the most exciting and very well rounded as well. An
Yeah.
incredible fighter, and I need to see that fight. And I back Alexander Pantoja, but for either guy who wins that one, I think they will shoot up the pound for pound rankings. And I mean, if Pantoja wins against Van as well, who's now had a title defense, it's almost at like, I know it's crazy to say with like Demetrius Johnson that, but he's in the GOAT conversation for flyweight. In my
Yeah,
opinion,
he
at
can't really
least.
do much more,
Yeah, I
right?
mean,
There's
like we
only so
said,
many. Is
maybe
it
it's
like Loner Kavanagh? But there's
yeah, maybe it's just unlucky, that he hasn't been like put in there with some other guy. I know at one point he was begging Demetrius Johnson to come out of the retirement so that he could fight him and get the big name on his record. And that's the thing.
yeah,
There's not too many big names um, in flyweight, but maybe now there will be some more in the future, hopefully, and maybe he will stick around for that long that he can fight them. Speaking of flyweights, who is the next name in the list?
it's of course I was about to say the arch nemesis of Pantoja, but not really. There were at least opponents before. It's Joshua Van, of course, the man who took his belt, albeit in a very sort of controversial way. I wouldn't really say maybe controversial, just in a very unfortunate way, I would say, because it wasn't a fight. It was more like an injury accident. It was more of an accident, right? So, but still, we do have Joshua Van in this position, and if you take away just that fight between Pantoja and Van, and just look at the rest of the record, I still think there's a lot of good quality on Van. We have that fight versus Brandon Royval, of course, and we also have the fight versus Tatsuro Taira, another fighter I really rate, and I think that would have been one of the best wins of Alexander Pantoja. If they fought,
Yeah.
if he had fought Tatsuro Taira, whoever had been the champion at that point would have had a good fight versus Tatsuro Taira. That's a good win. So for me, Joshua Van, some people might say he's not really experienced yet. He's not really built up the record enough yet, but he is the man sitting, on the belt here. He's the champ, regardless of the circumstances. And I think that, the Pantoja Van fight, it will decide a lot of things. It will be really, really interesting. I think it will be close. I'm not really sure who I'm leaning for, but I do think that Joshua Van has done enough. He's just shown such a good, technical level. Not really to the level of Pantoja, maybe in the wrestling, in the ground game, but in terms of his boxing, it's world class. It's better than Petr Yan, in my opinion. It's better than basically anyone. He just doesn't have the power, of course, but he's a flyweight, and that's maybe not to be expected. He does have some power. So for me, it's both on the record, at least that it's built up, and it's also on him just as a fighter for me, who's improving so much. So for me, it's Joshua Van here.
Yeah.
And
I totally agree with you. And the thing here, right, is the guy is 24 years old. I mean, that's
it's
mental.
crazy. Yeah.
The future is bright. Even if he loses against Pantoja, Pantoja will be gone in like a few years. Van is hopefully here to stay for another 10 or 15. I mean, that's mental to think. He has the potential here to start out. He starts out really young at a high level, and he will earn more. I remember watching some interviews with him before the Tyra fight, and that was basically when he got a lot of money off the Pantoja win, where he was like, now I can afford, more advanced trainings, better sparring partners, everything
Yeah.
like that. And what happened? He put on a very, very good performance against Arturo Taira, where he was a slight underdog. But I remember you and me picking him in our prediction because we backed him, and he showed that. He showed that he is world class, especially at flyweight. So, like we said, can't wait for the Pantoja fight. But Joshua Van, a very bright future lying ahead of him, and that's why he is at number 9. And then for the last position here, I mean, the number 10 spot, there's a lot of names that could have been. Surely it should be someone like Justin Gaethje or Carlos Olberg or Sean Strickland, like a champion, right? At this spot, what do you reckon? Or maybe not.
No, I don't think so. I think that, Justin Gaethje, Sean Strickland, they can have their days, but we're talking about real quality here. Who is the fighter who not only has he has a really good record, really good record. It's legends, back to back legends, and also the quality to back it up. Just one bad fight, but one bad fight doesn't make the fighter, worthless. We saw that recently versus Kamaru Usman, and it's of course at number 10 we have Dricus du Plessis coming back into the pound for pound rankings after his unfortunate loss versus Hamza Chimaev almost a year ago now. But
Yeah.
he did come back. Eventually, he did come back, and he came back in style. And it's you could almost say that maybe it's a bit of a, how could you say it? Weird timing that we're making this video right after he gets back into the win column here. So we can put it back into the pound for pound list. But that's not what's going on, I promise you. It's just Dricus du Plessis who showed his, quality versus Hamzat. And there is a real argument here for him before you get all jumpy here about our pick. And that is his insane record. I already covered it or said it about it a little bit. But there's a lot of quality here. At first, of course, we have Kamaru Usman. And then we have Strickland. We have Adesanya. We have Strickland back to back, of course, and in the middle there, Adesanya, and then before that, Whittaker, and good wins versus, Till and Tavares. So it's a really good record, and we cannot underrate him just because of one bad fight versus Hamzat. Would you agree with that? Do you think that the Hamzat fight can be looked over? Is it too much of a loss?
No. For me, it's actually completely different. I didn't
Yeah.
expect him to get dominated in the way he did. But that loss against Hamzat, not to be. This might be a weird angle to look at it, but I think a lot of people would agree when you think about it. Hamza Chimaev is one of the most aggressive fighters in the UFC, probably in UFC history. Before he fought Dricus du Plessis, he mauls everyone. And when he did it against guys like Kevin Holland, no one was impressed because that's not difficult, to be honest, for a UFC fighter. However, when he did it against Robert Whittaker, and that's what earned him this title shot. He hit Robert Whittaker with a disgusting face crank, broke his jaw and his teeth, and Robert Whittaker is, as we know, an elite middleweight. And then we thought, oh, this guy is a real issue. We knew he was an issue, but to do that against Whittaker, I mean, usually you're like, when someone gets past Whittaker, you're impressed. But when you do that against Whittaker, you think this guy can do that against pretty much anyone. What does that guy do when he faces Dricus du Plessis? He lays on top of him for 5 rounds without even daring to transition to a submission attempt. If he knew that he could submit Dricus without taking any damage or risking losing the fight, you believe me, he would. However, why didn't he? Because he knew that Dricus is too damn good, so the only thing he could do is lay on top of him for 5 rounds. stall out the fight. And that's impressive. We have to be said. Even though it's not, for me, it's not MMA. That's just wrestling. It's not mixed martial arts, is it? That's RAF. That's like this stuff Colby Covington is doing. It's not cool, but it's a win. And if you beat a guy like Dricus Duplessis, you just do it any way possible. But I actually think that loss is almost, it's not good, of course it's not, but it's not as bad as a lot of people make it out to be. I mean, Hamzat was scared of Dricus, and no one can tell me otherwise. And for me, just to continue on with what you were saying before, with the pound for pound list, we have to put the guys into the same weight class and match them up against each other. And do you think that we know he beat Strickland 2 times? Do you think pound for pound Duplessis loses against Ulberg or Gaethje? Personally,
No chance.
exactly. It's not even close. So that's why he is in at number 10 here. And I mean, I even thought this before he came back against Kamaru. And Kamaru, as we know, he's not finished. He beat Buckley like a year ago, and he's still very elite. And Dricus schooled him. So I think he totally deserves this spot. And it's going to be interesting to see where he goes next. Do you reckon it's a title shot or?
Yeah, I would love to see him fight for the title again, because there's a guy who's sitting on the belt, Sean Strickland, who he's already beat back to back, or not back to back, but twice at least. And the first time was pretty close. The second time it was basically a clinic from Dricus Duplessis. I think he 50-45 in similarly to the Usman fight. So, I mean, I'm sort of not expecting the UFC to make that fight, maybe because of that. They probably know, and also Strickland, he fought, is it 2 months ago now? I think the Hamzat fight was.
Yeah.
I think it was 2 months ago or something, right? So probably Strickland fights before then versus someone else, maybe Imavov, probably. And Dricus will have to fight another fighter probably in the meantime. It might be so that he waits for the title for the title shot to open up again. But either way, I'm just happy to see Dricus back in the win column, and I think that there's definitely a journey ahead in the UFC. He still isn't that old. I think he's 31 or something. So it's not a Merab situation where he comes back for maybe 2 fights or something. Or, of course, Merab can probably fight for however long he feels like, but he's not old, is what I'm trying to say. So, and also, I just wanted to touch on upon that. You talked about the Hamzat fight, and do you want to know who had more submission attempts in that fight, actually?
Surely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He had the only submission attempt in that fight. Hamzat didn't even try. It's insane. The more you think about it, Hamzat was scared of Dricus, and he saw only one single way to win that fight. And I mean, you can give him credit for executing a good game plan, but if you look at it on the whole, Dricus and Hamzat as fighters, especially after that Strickland fight that Hamzat fought, put Dricus in there and he pieces him up. So I don't know. Hamzat shouldn't belong in MMA. He can go back to wrestling or something and do that instead.
And I mean, the guy, he's a terrific fighter, but he can't even cut weight properly. He's missed weight against Nate Diaz, so he ended up fighting Kevin Holland instead. The famous when he turned heel, when he pointed middle fingers to the crowd and stuff, and people started booing him. And like he's like, I don't care, and we were like, you probably should care because you're not going to get any big fights if we can't rely on you. And what's happening at Strickland? He looked dead on the scales and could barely walk. Arman Sarukian, who was in his camp, came out afterwards and said like he could barely walk. He was like dead, and you saw that in the octagon as well. That was like 5% of the Hamzat we saw against Dricus. So if you can't even, as the defending champion of the world, cut weight properly, I'm sorry, you're nowhere near this discussion. To compare that against a model pro like this Dricus Duplessis, I just think that solidifies Dricus's position on this list even more, in my opinion. But there we have it. Do you have anything else to add to our complete list here?
No, I think that it's a very sensible list, and everyone listening to this needs to remember that there's a lot of movement right now in the UFC. There's a lot of fighters, champions who's recently lost their belts. And so, of course, this list is gonna be a little bit of a mess, and it's gonna be looking really different depending on every person. Basically, that's what I've been seeing online. A lot of people have very different lists, and that's because there's a lot of fighters here who almost had a perfect record, were basically set in stone. You had Merab, you had Ilya, you had Pereira before, Pantoja,
Yeah.
looked and Rickus. All of these fighters looked that they were gonna be, in their respective pound for pound spots, basically, almost unless someone else lost, and then all of them lost. It's insane. So there's a lot
Yeah.
of movement right now in the UFC, and that's why this list is very, very, it's tricky to make, but we tried to make it as good as possible and as real as possible, right?
And that's the thing. Like we started the video with saying, it's about opinion. And the exciting thing here is there's not too many title fights announced in the upcoming months. So it's going to be really interesting to see who gets these title shots, and that will affect this list a lot. So I reckon that
Yeah.
in a few months we'll probably have to do an updated version again, and we'll give you the new updated list. But until then, let us know your lists down below. And thank you guys a lot for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Yeah, catch you guys next time.